Well, welcome to another edition of Tell Me a Story. This is brought to you by the Friends of the Sandwich Town Archives. My name is Joan Osgood, and we also want to thank the Sandwich Community TV for their assistance in helping us do these video taping. It really is very helpful. I have with me today, pleased to have with me today, Mrs. Edith Huck, who grew up in Sandwich very early, back in the early 30s. She moved from here, from her town in, Brookline to Sandwich. And so I'm going to ask Edith, thank you Edith, I'm going to ask you, starting out if I may, what brought you to Sandwich with you and your family?
My father didn't really like working in Boston, in the city, and his friend Jim Freeman told him about a place that was for sale with a big apple orchard, which that appealed to my father, so that's when he bought, probably 1929 or 30, bought the a place in Spring Hill in East Sandwich. Mm-hmm. So that's about when we moved here, when I was about 3 years old, I think.
Okay, so that was maybe we should help people to tell them exactly where that farm was. So if you can describe where it is on Route 6A, Edith.
Probably the easiest way to describe it is by people who know the Twin Ponds. Right on 6A, there were two ponds across from each other.
Yep.
And people who know Joe Votto, his house is up on the just up the hill from ours.
Yes. So actually, I think David and Carol Warren now own your farm. Do they not? The Warrens?
The Warrens own it now. Yes.
Yes. So that brought you down. One of your friends of your dad's told him about the orchard, which is in back of that great house, right next to the Twin Ponds, and he decided to farm that apple orchard. Is that correct?
Yes. And so, yes, apple orchard mostly, but we had some pear trees and other trees, and we made cider. The cider house was right beside the pond.
Oh, it was? Yeah.
Right. And then he soon became very involved in the things in the town. He was a volunteer fire department. And those days they had a moth superintendent to take care of the gypsy moths and other insects that were bothering the farms and so forth.
Yes. So he was a gypsy moth.
Right, but he sprayed for other things. Whatever anybody needed to have sprayed.
Well, of course, he would be very interested and concerned about that with his apple orchard and his pear orchard.
Yes.
Yes, yeah. Can you share with me, that must have been a beautiful farm back then. You said it was 50 acres?
Yes.
Did you used to play back there?
Yes, and back of the apple orchard was all woods.
Uh-huh.
So we often went back there. Little tree houses, not real tree houses, but little wigwams just by putting sticks together.
Oh, sure, yeah.
Yeah. Yes, so it was, I don't think anybody appreciates what they have when they're young until they get older.
Yes.
But, and Sandwich was a very different place then, of course.
Yes. We're talking about back in the 1930s, yes. Yes, yeah.
And I took the Marky Ellis's school bus, which has been in the 4th of July parades.
Oh, yes.
That's the way I went to school the first few years, at least.
So that has been in some of the 4th of July fairs and whatever, the Ellis' school bus. So Mark Ellis was the driver of that school bus back then. Uh-huh. And he picked you up at your farm on Route 6A there.
Yes.
Who else? Can you remember any of the other children that would go on that bus in the area, Edith?
Well, Jack Gilson would have, and Sammy Lawrence, who lived up with the Kings at the top of the hill.
Uh-huh.
Connie Orcutt must have, because she lived just up the road. I'm trying to remember who else particularly that is still around.
Yes, quite a few people. Now, you say you played in your backyard, in your 50 acres plus. Can you remember some of your school friends or some of your neighborhood friends that you played with?
Well, up the hill, in which is now Joe Votto's house, was Mrs. King, a grandmother who was taking care of her 3 children, Hazel, Polly, and Sammy Lawrence. And their uncle lived with them, Mrs. King's son. So the Lawrence children used to come down and play. We used to go up to Connie Orcutt's some.
Mm-hmm. And where did she live?
Near Shirley Cross, near Tom Ellis.
Oh, on Spring Hill
in that
Road?
area.
Uh-huh.
There was a big barn there, which is still there, hard to see from the street. But the house and barn is still there.
Yes, on Spring Hill Road. Yes.
Right.
Yes. I think you had mentioned to me, we had talked earlier, about a sad story about Connie's, I think it was mother?
Right.
Can you share that story?
Yes. The railroad track was right in back of her house, and yet Connie's mother was killed by a train at that crossing.
She was, yeah.
So that was sad, yes.
Yes, that was sad. And
I think it was, however, I think it was after. I always remember it, of course, but I probably think it was after we graduated from high school.
Okay, so Connie wasn't a young child.
But I saw her afterwards a little bit, but then she got married and moved away.
Mm-hmm. You had mentioned the Lawrence and the Kings that lived next door to you in what now is the home of Joe Votto on Route 6A. And you had shared with me, I believe, that a gentleman named King was killed in a fire back many years ago.
Right, very early.
What do you remember of that?
Very early forest fire, because we had those days there seemed to be a lot of fires. Sometimes starting at the old dump, but
yes.
which is now the nice recycling place.
Yes.
Yes, the two King brothers were killed in that fire, as I remember, but that was a long time ago.
Yes, actually, when you
so
were
there was one King brother left that,
mm-hmm.
that lived with his mother and the 3 Lawrence children
that you played with. You know, when you told me that story last week, it was very sad, and it did intrigue me. I found, if I'm going to take just a second here, I found an article in the Falmouth Enterprise back in 1938, April 27th, that talks about that forest fire. I'm going to read just a couple sentences here, because that was quite a significant and quite horrible fire back then. It's dated April 27th, 1938, Edith.
All right, I would have said about that time, yes.
Yes, because you would have been about 12.
Yes.
Yes. One of the worst forest fires on Cape Cod in many years broke out yesterday afternoon. It cost the life of one man, Thomas E. Adams of Sandwich, and 3 others are on the danger list at the Cape Cod Hospital. They are Gordon King of Sandwich, Irvin Draper, and Clarence Gibbs of Buzzards Bay. And it was a horrible fire. It was in part of Falmouth, part of Mashpee, and part of Sandwich. And it took them days to get it out. And the 3 men that actually died in that fire were, as you remembered, the King, Gordon King.
One King, yeah,
yes,
okay.
Thomas Adams and Edwin Draper. And if we were to go up on Route 130, on the right, heading towards Mashpee, there is a large boulder, a large monument, and their names are inscribed on it.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yes, in honor of their lives being taken. So that must have been a really, really sad event in Sandwich back then. Can you tell me about, you went to Henry T. Wing School.
Yes.
And you, being a teacher, and we will talk a little bit about that, but you know, must have had some interesting times with your teachers there. You became a teacher after that. Can you describe some of your favorite teachers, and what types of things did they teach you?
Well, as I guess I told you, I sort of did remember certain highlights from each grade.
Sure.
I remember learning to read in first grade with Mrs. Gannon, and how she taught us phonics, which was so important, and nowadays is not taught that much.
Yes.
Although they're getting back to it.
Yes.
And things like to learn the vowels, we were told to remember that the E made the vowel say its name.
E made the vowel say its name. That's very good. Yes.
And then I remember third grade teacher, Miss Peer, because she gave us a big certificate when we knew, with a star on it, when we knew all the multiplication tables.
Oh, okay. Third grade.
Backwards and forwards, I mean, you know, which now I think the kids still, for math, have to look things up on their computer, on their little iPhones or tablets or whatever.
Yes.
And then sixth grade, we all liked Mr. Kiernan, who later became principal, and he had us learn the Gettysburg Address by heart and say it on the stage, which was good for lots of things. It was good for history and also just memorizing something and having to say it.
Yes.
And then Mrs. Grace Mullally, who lived across the street from us, we had an eighth grade, and she got me interested in reading biographies because we all had to read biographies and then report on them. So those
and did
particularly stand out.
Did you have to report, as you did the Gettysburg Address in front of your whole class, did you have to report the biographies in front of your whole class?
Yes.
Oh, you did?
Yes.
Yeah.
Which was also good, and I liked doing it.
That's good.
I was later in some of this, one I remember at least, probably two plays that we did in high school. So
that was probably later on in more towards high school, as you say. Do you remember the plays?
Not really now. I remember being a cross teacher or something in one.
A cross teacher, okay. Now, we had talked about your life on the farm in East Sandwich. Can you tell me what your life was like during that time? Did you have chores? Did you have, many families back then, it was a necessity, had farm animals. Can you tell us anything about how you might have had
We
those
had
things?
both chickens and pigs during the war, which a lot of people seemed to do at that time. So I gathered the eggs, of course, and I remember probably feeding the pigs, although they got pretty healthy things. They got dropped apples and things like
yes.
that.
You had plenty of apples to feed them.
And I did pick apples, of course, and help sell cider.
Did you help make the cider?
Yes.
You did?
Yes.
Yeah.
Very simple machine where you just drop the apples in and they were ground up and came onto a sort of a net thing, and then they were squashed, and you put the gallon underneath the spout.
Sure.
And so it's a simple device.
So you must have had a stand there. Did you have a stand on 6A?
Yes, yes.
And did you Were you part of the stand? Did you help to sell the apples and cider?
Yes.
You did?
Yes.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, so.
I imagine that not only townspeople might have bought from you, but how about the summer people?
Oh yes, I'm
coming
sure
through?
they did too. I don't think there were quite as many people coming down in the summer as now.
Yes, yeah.
As I say, Sandwich was a very different type of place.
How about, how did you get your milk? How did you have cows on your farm, or?
No, but milk was delivered.
Oh, it
The
was
Roberti
delivered.
farm, which was, as you probably know, used to be up just beyond where Stop and Shop is, and now they have a nice garden there,
Yes.
a community garden. But the Robertis delivered milk, left it on our step from near our porch where people could come in, and the ice was brought in that same place and put in our refrigerator. Not refrigerated then, an ice box.
An
we
ice
called
box.
it.
Yeah. So both, perhaps Louis Roberti delivered your milk. Do you remember who delivered it?
Do I remember what?
Who delivered your milk? Was it Louis Roberti himself?
No, I don't remember for sure that.
Yeah.
I'm sure he had help doing it
Yes,
because
yeah.
he ran the farm. So.
Yes, yeah. Of course, Clyde Gill also, this would have been quite a few years after what we're talking, was also was a delivery man, a dairy delivery man for Mr. Roberti. So he helped do that. That farm was the last dairy farm on Cape Cod.
Yes, dairy farm, yes.
Yes, yeah. I think back in the 1970s is when the Roberti started to close it.
Probably,
Yes,
yes.
yeah. You graduated in
44.
1944, and then you went to college.
Yes.
Can you tell us about that?
Well, I always wanted to do something with children, so I went to Wheelock College, which was then just for teachers of first, second, and kindergarten, nursery school, and first, second, and third grade.
Okay.
Now they do social work and legal things with children, and but just recently been joined with Boston University. But
Yes, I read that.
it was a small college then, probably only about 100 in our class, and I lived in a very nice dorm and made good friends. Had good teachers, so it was a good life.
Did you teach after that, after you got your degree?
Yes, I went to teach first grade in Longmeadow, Mass, outside of Springfield. Lived in the YWCA there, and took the bus or trolley to school in Longmeadow.
We haven't talked about your brother, because it was you and your brother Henry that grew up in that farm on Route 6A. Can you tell me a little bit about Henry?
Well, Henry had a paper route from a young boy, and it went pretty far up towards the town. I know he showed us one time recently, I would say up to Liberty Street anyway. I know it's past the Crow Farm. And then I remember he delivered eggs sometimes to Alice Cook, who was the Thornton Burgess, who was the one who Thornton Burgess wrote about because she fed wild animals,
Yes.
chipmunks, I mean, woodchucks and
skunks. Yeah.
which was a little controversy because the farmers didn't like her attracting the things like woodchucks.
Oh, yes.
And then all through high school, he worked for Alfred Hoy at First National.
Oh, yes. right in the center of town in Jarvis Street.
Yes.
Yes. Yes, I remember Alfred Hoy. He and Josephine Canary Hoy, they were lovely people. Lived on
Yes.
Liberty Street their whole married life.
Right.
Yeah, and so he was the manager of the First National grocery store.
Right.
And Henry worked for him?
Yes.
Uh-huh. So,
And things I remember were piled fairly high, and you had to get he or others would have to get a ladder to get some of the things off the top shelves.
that you wanted, yeah. Yeah, things were, that was quite, in those days, actually the stores were not as large, of course, as they are now. They were quite small.
Yes.
So Henry delivered papers, I guess, on a bike? On a bicycle?
While he was young, I'm not sure what age he started. But
Yeah.
by bicycle, yes.
Yes, all the way down to Liberty Street.
Oh, yeah, yes,
pretty
pretty far
much,
uptown,
yeah.
I know, because he pointed out a few years ago some of the houses that he delivered to.
Yeah. We cannot forget the woman who helped both you and Henry grow up, that you were so fond of. You knew her and called her Mamie. Her name was Mary Johnson, and later married your father, so became Mary Johnson Hall. Can you tell me a little bit about her?
Well, she came really to take care of us after my brother Henry was born, because my mother had a nervous breakdown, and really it turned out was not happy in rural Sandwich after being brought up in Boston in the city. So we continued to see my mother, but we were essentially brought up by a woman we called Mamie, who was later known as Mary Hall, because she did marry my father. So,
Quite an extraordinary woman.
Yes.
Yes.
And you knew her.
I did know
as
her,
Mary
yes.
Hall. Yes.
Yes. Yeah.
A lot of people, I think I found out later, thought she was our mother, because she was always treated like a member of the family.
She was always there. Yes. Yes.
So that's who.
And she was, as I recall, quite friendly with Martha Blake.
Yes. Well, she worked at Greenbrier for Martha. She's a very good friend of Martha Blake's.
Yes.
And worked at Greenbrier Jam Kitchen.
She did. She, amongst many others, worked in that Greenbrier.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And it's still going. Isn't that
Yes.
amazing? Yeah.
Yes. They're still making jam, not as much right now, but they have, until very recently, they had a big jam kitchen. And now I can't Misway was in charge of it until a couple of years ago, the jam kitchen, and she was started when Mamie was working there, so she was there a long time.
Yes, yeah. And I think you mentioned too that you were involved and partook of the different social events at the Grange while you were growing up.
Yes, well, Mamie and my father and brother were all members, and I don't think I ever joined for some reason. I remember taking college friends there when they still had square dances every Saturday night. So, but it was a big social thing for a lot of people to go to Grange, and Mamie and my father played whist there.
Oh, they did, yes.
Yes.
Yeah. I wanted to ask you about school again. Very often, we talked about social events, Edith. Very often, back then especially, the school provided social outlets for the children. Didn't have iPads and computers and things like that.
No.
No, weren't even dreamed of. Can you tell me some of the social things that you did as a result of the school or at the school?
I don't remember too much of the social things. Give me an idea what you're talking about.
How about, did you have proms back then?
Proms?
Yes. Did you go to a prom?
I didn't go to a prom, no.
No.
They may have, but I wasn't friends with any particular boy.
Okay.
Some of the girls were, but
Yeah.
I guess, but.
Well, tell me, let's just get back to even more current times. After you graduated from Wheelock, you worked for a year or so, and you met your husband.
Yes, in Long Meadow, when I was teaching.
How did that come about? Can you tell us about that story?
Well, actually, his mother happened to be a good friend of somebody who my family knew.
Oh, yes.
So I actually probably met his mother first. And then I met my husband through her.
And then you got introduced. Yeah. And when did you get married?
1950.
And his name was your husband's name?
Rodney, or everybody called him Rod.
Rod Huck, yes.
Yes.
Yeah. And how many children do you have?
2. They're both adopted as babies and both wonderful children.
You're very fortunate,
So,
yes.
A daughter named Sue and a son named Carl.
That's great. And you have grandchildren, I'm sure. Great-grandchildren?
Yes, grandchildren and great-grandchildren.
That's wonderful. Now, I want to thank you for coming on our Tell Me a Story. It is always nice to be able to, we've interviewed people that have lived in Sandwich proper, but to interview someone and to hear the stories about East Sandwich and growing up there, is very important, and is very, very nice that we've been able to have you here to do that.
Yes.
I want to thank you for joining us for another Tell Me a Story. This will be processed, this film, with Edith, and you'll be able to see this on our website, the Sandwich Archives website, and also on SCTV. Thank you very much for joining us, and we will be with you again with another Tell Me a Story shortly. Bye-bye.